Thank you very much. We are very, very thankful for the explanation that you have given us and the house rules. I hope that everything comes out well and in order for the interpretation to go well. And if you have any sort of question, if you could please write it on the chat itself. Good evening to everyone. That My name is Alejandro Villarrios. I give you the welcome to our web. And in order for us to start this, I want to talk about some things that have happened and some characteristics that are important in order for us to pay attention to in this reflection space. And those of you that have been that are joining us from other countries, we want to talk about that since late 2025, Bolivia has been mired in one of the worst political and economic crises in its modern history. The victory of center-right President Rodrigo Paz, backed by the United States, who's now the president of Bolivia and who's been backed by the United States from October in 2025. It was very important because it ended nearly 2 decades of rule by the movement towards socialism. And also we could talk about that we could divide it between two steps, that it departed from the 14 years that Evo Morales governed. This raised concerns about the new regime's economic agenda, shifting towards neoliberal policies, which is clearly goes towards neoliberal policies. In December 2025, his administration's decision to eliminate historic fuel subsidies through supreme decree, and they also wanted to do away with a lot of rights of workers' rights within a neoliberal agenda. Something that was also something that the people also resisted. It was also the approval of the law 5503, and 1720, which took away allowed, it was an anti-peasant law that allows farmers to match the small plots to share them with large corporations. And it's because of this and many other things that have happened. There is a lot of protests that have been happening, and it has been led by miners, teachers, indigenous communities, and unions under the Bolivian Workers' Confederation. These have escalated into demands for Paz's resignation right now, because aside from many different factors that it has caused a lot of issues in the people, and this has brought us into perceiving that the government is and economic reforms have served elites and foreign interests rather than ordinary Bolivians. All of this have brought us that we could see that this crisis has exposed deep structural flaws. And this still have to be resolved as a Bolivian society. And this shows the fragility of this government and how this is mining the Constitution, and how it's showing us that it's still a very liberal state and is mining our democracy and Constitution. And this has made us to question the state itself. And right now it's gaining a lot of international momentum. But we have to say that the certain narratives of the current regime and our right-wing governments in Latin America and the United States, and and how drug dealers are are minimizing and are saying that this political that there's and this is a protest that is part of a broader pro-popular struggle in defense of livelihoods and in opposition to the neoliberal transformation of the economy. It also raises urgent questions about the durability of democratic institutions and the role of grassroots movements in shaping political outcomes. So with this, I want to this webinar aims to provide an in-depth analysis of the Bolivian crisis based on current dynamics, origins, and key actors, and to explore the current regime neoliberal agenda and the role of imperialist powers. It also aims to promote solidarity among ILPS members and movements worldwide, and how we could use this platform as an interperialist struggle that is in 40 countries. I'm going to present our main speaker is a Bolivian political activist. He currently serves as the Secretary General of ILPS Bolivia. He has participated in efforts to strengthen coordination among popular indigenous, peasant, and progressive organizations in Bolivia. His work focuses on anti-imperialism, social justice, popular participation, and the defense of national sovereignty. He has also provided analysis on Bolivia's political situation and the challenges facing the country's social movements and popular secrets. Welcome, Diego Gallardo Martinez, and the floor is yours so you can share with us and you could talk to us about the situation in our country.
It's important that we do this activity because the resistance that we are seeing in Bolivia and the alternatives of the different political platforms. We say hello to the different allies and other member organizations of the ILPS, an anti-imperialist space that makes it possible for us to do these kinds of dialogues and webinars to strengthen the anti-imperialist struggle in Latin America. Saying that, I think it's important that we tell the audience who are joining us today, especially those from other countries outside of Bolivia, it's important to do a short summary of what are the different aspects that compose these different mobilizations. So we have the antithesis of the different previous problems. The different structural causes of the problem are causes that have a historic precedent. In 2017, there was a breach of the constitutional order. He had already won the last election. And then heading into 2019, there was a development of destabilization of the economy within our country. We identified two different structural problems, causes, that they seem invisible for the press. But the first one is, as I said, the breach of the constitutional order The second being the crisis of neoliberal austerity. These causes that seem invisible have caused Bolivia to be in this situation right now. To start, as I was saying, with the breach of constitutional order, we have to talk about the coup d'etat of 2019. The political structures of the right orchestrated alongside the embassy of the United States a destabilization of the society that led to the coup of 2019. Why? The police participated, the armed forces also participated. They were the ones asking for the government at that time, Rueda, to abandon the country. There were mobilizations and other civil platforms that were linked to young people who were tied to the ultra-right, such as the different civic committees led by one of the oppositions. Sorry. And so why is this important? To understand that these ruptures of the social norms led to the conflict of today. Because first, from that moment, we retook the electoral positions. The people themselves were already asking for a re-election. The candidate of that point, Luis Arce Catatorca, would mark the different ruptures in the order, in the constitutional order. Luis Catacora came after 2019. This was the government that would profoundly rupture the constitutional order. First, he instrumentalized the open justice order. There was a constitutional order that ended with the magistrates of administration. Once they were done with their parts, Luis used the governmental arms, excuse me, the limitations of the National Assembly to limit the Congress, allowing for destabilization of it. And of course, what's more foundational is that the vulnerabilization of the electoral body. Sorry, the audio is going in and out. Since so sorry. The inability of the candidates of the popular movement, that which is indigenous and peasant-led, that was the first antithesis of which Luis Catacora had first ruptured when we see the breach of the constitutional order. By not participating, not allowing the indigenous and peasant bodies to participate with their own electoral processes, it actually it barred an important majority of the Bolivian country from engaging in this. They who represent the different different social sectors
La proscripción no le permite tener su propio candidato al movimiento indígena originario campesino.
The right
Y
was
esa
not
falta de
allowing for
representación política
the
se ha atenuado
indigenous
en que el
communities to
voto
have
nulo
their own
en
representative.
cantidad de votos en la primera vuelta ha logrado
The number of votes in the first round of
una importante
elections
cantidad de votación. Es decir,
actually amounted
ese
to a
gran
significant amount.
movimiento campesino
And so
popular de
that
Occidente, de
movement of
Oriente, de
Philip,
las zonas
peasant,
periurbanas,
petty
va a
urban people
reflejarse con un
actually
voto de rechazo a
reflected
ese proceso electoral
a
porque
vote
lo
that
entendía como
rejected this process
inconstitucional,
because
lo
it was
entendía como
unconstitutional.
una democracia que
It was
proscribía a
understood
las
as
mayorías nacionales en Bolivia
a
y por lo
democracy
tanto
that went
emite el
around.
voto nulo. En esa línea es que el voto nulo llega a sacar el segundo lugar en la votación después del primero. Logra el voto nulo ser una de las
And so,
principales
with the
fuerzas que
annulled
hubiera
vote,
ido
became one
a
of the
una segunda
strongest
vuelta
ways
en caso de participar
to
el
enter
candidato del movimiento al socialismo. Esta, esta
this
desinstitucionalización e instrumentalización del órgano electoral ha
disinstitutionalization of
provocado
the
igual
electoral
el
arm
robo o el
of
secuestro
the
de la
state
sigla del movimiento al
represented
socialismo
a
en una
robbery
disputa
of
interna por algunas
the
estructuras que
people's
estaban
power.
vinculadas al gobierno de ese entonces. La mayoría del instrumento
So
político,
sorry, the
por
audio is
supuesto,
cutting out.
ha caracterizado a ese hecho como una traición a los principios de la revolución democrática y cultural y al proceso de cambio. En ese mismo gobierno, Luis Arce
Under
Catacora
that
va a
same government
buscar
of
incluso
Luis Catagora
atentar contra la integridad
will
física del
attempt
propio exmandatario y
to,
es esa suerte de institucionalización que va a llevar al proceso electoral donde va a ganar Rodrigo Paz, perdón,
excuse me,
para
sorry,
la
this will
siguiente
lead to
elección
then
nacional.
the next electoral candidate,
El gobierno actual es
Jaime.
producto de la proscripción
The
de la
government
democracia
of
del
that
movimiento
time
campesino popular.
was a product
Ese es
of
uno de los
the
antecedentes
power and the
principales del
strength of the
conflicto
peasant
y,
movement.
por supuesto, al no haber
And of
participado en las
course,
elecciones,
by
este
not
nuevo gobierno
participating
no
in the
gozaba
elections,
de la
this new government
credibilidad ni la
didn't
legitimidad
enjoy
que naturalmente
the
le da un proceso
legitimacy
electoral a un
that would normally
gobierno
come with an
mucho más
electoral
libre,
process,
transparente, democrático.
one that is
Este
transparent and
es
democratic.
la crisis que ha constituido el
I'm so sorry, the audio is in and out.
ya las medidas
As you
de
can
carácter
see, the
económico
different
después del golpe de Estado de 2019
so then
derroca
after the coup d'etat of
inconstitucionalmente a Evo Morales antes que
2019,
termine su mandato. Y eso tiene una consecuencia, una cosa, que era el litio, el control de la industrialización del litio, porque el gobierno de Evo Morales empezó la industrialización soberano, sin condicionantes de organismos internos. Y además para que esa industrialización pueda, pueda beneficiar al desarrollo del país.
I-
Pero el golpe de
I'm
Estado
so sorry.
desmadró el proceso de industrialización. Lo de esto van a sabotear las empresas estratégicas del Estado, no van a dar continuidad a a la planificación que tenía prevista, sobre todo en el campo energético, de migrar de lo que
And
es
so
la dependencia de
the
hidrocarburos, el gas, el petróleo y sus derivados, a, sí, ¿me escuchas?
I'm sorry for cutting off. Is there internet problems? Because I think that maybe there's audio issues because it's going in and out. If you want to close your video,
Bien,
that way it
entonces,
can
como le
maybe help.
decía,
Okay, and
ese
so
sigue
as I
siendo
was
un
saying,
factor importante en el sentido de lo económico. La
and
crisis
so the
económica
sense, the
que
economic
derivó
sense
desde el
of
golpe
the
de Estado de
crisis that
2019
came
nos va a dejar
starting with the
las consecuencias de lo
2019
que fue el régimen
coup
de
d'etat
Yanine Áñez. Un
are actually
gobierno que en eficiencia
consequences of
transicional
the
se duró
years
un
before
año porque
a government in government
quiso caer la
transition, this
economía,
transition having taken
no
many
dio
years,
continuidad a la
it didn't
planificación de la
give
diversificación
continuity
energética,
to the
quiso
different
entregar y abrir,
programs
incluso
for
firmar
energy,
algunos proyectos de
and
entendimiento y
it
contratos con
actually
empresas extranjeras,
um, other
benefició, por
agreements that
supuesto,
happened with private
digamos, a
enterprises
los empresarios, a los agroindustriales,
that was
pero
supposed to give
el pueblo en las calles
other
volvió a
leeway to the
derrotar
different
a ese
agro
gobierno de
industries.
transición. Sin embargo,
But
Luis Arce Catacora
even without
también va a
that,
empezar a abrir las puertas del retorno del neoliberalismo con las famosas 40
it
medidas,
still opened up the
primeras
path
20
to
medidas que
neoliberalism.
negocia el año 2023 y después otras 20 medidas también el año 2024. Luis Arce Catacora va
And so
a hacer
Luis
el gobierno
Catacora
que va a desmantelar totalmente
marked
el
a
modelo
government that
económico
would
exitoso que había tenido en los primeros 14 años de la
change the
administración Evo
government's
Morales
economic
en Bolivia.
policies
¿Esto en qué se va a
in a big
traducir?
way in
En una
Bolivia.
escasez de divisas, no va a poder controlar
This would not be able to control
las consecuencias del mercado
the
internacional
consequences
en
of
lugar
the internal
de
market
incrementar una regulación mayor por parte del Estado
to
en la
increment
economía,
a
más
big
bien
part
va
of the
a
economy,
liberalizar la economía.
but
De
rather
ahí es de que
actually
otorga la
liberalize the
liberación de las
economy,
exportaciones a los privados
including
en
the
su lógica de
exports
que los privados
to
al
private
exportar la
enterprises,
carne y los productos de primera
the
necesidad,
meat
alimentos al
and other
exterior,
basic
iban a
necessities
traer más
to
divisas a
the
la economía, cuando eso no pasó.
outside of the country.
Lo que sucedió fue que lo
What ended up
depositaron en
happening
paraísos fiscales y otros,
is that,
¿no?
yes, they
Entonces,
ended up in these offshore accounts.
igual hizo otras concesiones más, pero
And he
ninguna
also made other
concesión al
concessions,
movimiento popular.
but
Ya la
not
crisis se
to the
estaba
popular movements.
profundizando. Los
Right
últimos
after the
años de Luis
crisis had
Arce
gotten to
Catacora
the
van a
worst parts,
derivar en los problemas de gasolina. La
the problems
corrupción va a
for
ser la marca
gasoline,
institucional del gobierno de Luis Arce.
corruption actually ended up
Reiterados
being the
casos
biggest mark of
de gobiernos donde los
Catagora's government.
ministros o autoridades de Estado estaban involucradas y que hasta ahora recién siguen saliendo a la luz, va a ser la
Until
tónica. Pero en
today,
lo
we are still
económico, el
seeing
ajuste neoliberal va a ser una de las
other
causas
policies that are
principales
coming
del
to
golpe de
light
2019.
that are a
Continúan
result of
medidas de
the
carácter neoliberal y afectando el
coup
interés de la
d'etat of
economía popular
2019
durante el gobierno de Luis Arce, y es el gobierno de Rodrigo
during
Paz
Luis
el que
Arce's
termina ya
government.
formalizando el
The one who would
gobierno
end up
de
formalizing
la aplicación de medidas neoliberales.
these
Por
neoliberal
supuesto,
policies.
¿cuál va a ser
So then,
gracias
of
por la
course,
lámina, ahora continuamos ahí, porque ahí viene la explicación de por qué
okay, so now on this slide, it
no es
comes
que
the
sea
explanation.
intransigencia, no es que sea
It's not that
una
it's
petición o una
a
consigna
petition
muy radical
or
la pedida
a
de renuncia
radical
del presidente.
cosign
Lo que
this
pasa es que
asking
ya desde
of
el
the president to
2019,
resign.
hace
It's
7 años,
because as of
el
6 years
movimiento
ago,
popular viene
the popular
aguantando
movement has been
varias
um,
traiciones, arremetidas,
suffering
afectaciones a la economía popular.
these
El
different
planteamiento de la
hits
salida a
to
la
the
crisis que
economy.
viene ya desde hace más de
The
4 o
crisis
5
that
años
has been coming out of the
sigue
last 5, 6 years,
priorizando
it's still
salir de la crisis
prioritizing.
económica, pero por
The
la
priority is still
derecha,
to get out of this
haciendo el
economic
ajuste
crisis,
neoliberal,
but
privatizando
on
empresas
what is in the
estatales,
interest of the right,
vendiendo recursos naturales a
giving
las
priority to
empresas
neoliberal policies,
transnacionales,
giving like these
descargando el
kickbacks
costo de
to
la
these
crisis en las espaldas
private
de los trabajadores,
enterprises on the backs of the
afectando la
workers,
salud, la
affecting
educación
the different
pública,
health and the
pero no hay
public
una
education.
alternativa
There
que
is no
resuelva la
alternative
crisis
that could
económica
resolve this
por la
crisis
izquierda,
economic that is caused
defendiendo
by
y
the right,
protegiendo la economía popular
then
y más bien
defending,
afectando a los que más tienen, a la
sorry,
banca
uh,
financiera,
by
a los
affecting those
grandes
that are
agroindustriales,
in the richest,
terratenientes y
that have
otros.
the most in their
Esos
bank
son los dos
accounts,
pilares que se han acumulado, la
the
desinstitucionalización, la vulneración de la
disinstitutionalization, the
Constitución
vulnerabilization of the
por el régimen de
Constitution
Áñez, el
because of the
gobierno derechista
regimen
de Luis Arce
of
y
of
ahora el
the
gobierno
rightist
neoliberal
government
de Rodrigo Paz, han
and a
acumulado
neoliberal
a un
austerity
punto tal en el
programs.
que el control de la justicia y el órgano electoral son de manera abierta, sin ningún
These are
disimulo,
open acts.
están funcionales al gobierno de Rodrigo Paz. Y en lo económico, desde el régimen
In
de
the
Yanine Áñez,
economic,
igual se profundiza en el
since the
gobierno de Luis
regime
Arce Catacora, y en el gobierno actual
of
de Rodrigo
Luis
Paz
Arce
se profundiza, sobre
and the
todo con
current
el
government
decreto
of La Paz
5503, que es
culminate
el gobierno, la medida principal de ajuste neoliberal que hizo.
in
¿Por
the
qué
Decree
La Paz es el centro
5503
del
of
conflicto y
neoliberal
por qué
austerity,
renuncia, por
mobilization,
qué
and
se está
deception?
pidiendo la renuncia de Rodrigo
So
Paz?
why are we
Hay que
asking for his
remitirnos a
resignation of La
que este
Paz?
gobierno actual
We
en
reiterate that this
campaña
government,
electoral fue a
through his
prometer y
campaign,
firmó compromisos con el campo popular,
electoral campaigns,
indicando que no
promised
haría
to the
ninguna
popular
medida que
movements that
afecte la
he would
economía
not
popular.
do a
que no
movement
iba
that would
a
affect the popular movements,
endeudarse
that
con
he
el
would not
Fondo Monetario
indebt the
Internacional,
country
que
further
iba a
with the IMF,
distribuir la plata
that
del
he would
Estado para todos los
redistribute
bolivianos, para los
the
campesinos.
earnings
Fue
of the
por
country
las
back to the
provincias
peasants.
del movimiento campesino de la Tupac Katari, de aquí de La Paz, de Occidente. Fue con su candidato a vicepresidente
With his
a
vice president, who
mostrarse
was
como
running
el
with the election with him,
candidato que no es de la derecha neoliberal, del pasado, que
presenting
mucha
as
de la gente no y por
a
eso
candidate that is
es que
not of the
termina
right.
recibiendo la votación de los sectores populares. Los
So of
mismos
course they
sectores
end
hoy
up
están
receiving the
movilizados.
votes of the popular
Entonces,
sectors.
ese es un primer engaño que
So
sufre el
that's the
movimiento
first
popular
lie,
campesino, que lo
that the popular
utiliza
movement
para la
of the
elección,
peasants,
le da el voto, pero después, cuando ya es gobierno,
they
asume un
give them
rumbo
their votes,
contrario al que había dicho.
and then he
Sus
does the
ministros
exact
son parte
opposite of what
de,
he
son parte de
stated.
la derecha neoliberal tradicional,
He
sus
is
ministros de
part of the right,
presidencia
the
y ministro de
traditional
economía.
elites of the
Otra
country.
característica es el narcotráfico y la corrupción.
The other
Aquello que
aspect
ha
is
sido una
narco-trapficking and
característica en
corruption.
el gobierno de
Here
Luis
has
Arce
been
Janine Áñez,
a very clear
vuelve a ser una
characteristic of
característica en
Luis
el gobierno
Arce
de Rodrigo Paz.
and
Las
Rodrigo
denuncias y
Paz.
escándalos por
So the
narcomaletas
denouncements
con
about the
cargas de
suitcases
cocaína,
that are
las
full of cocaine,
narcomaderas, un caso anterior donde bastante cantidad de
there is
droga estaba siendo
a
comercializado por
surplus
aeropuertos
of drugs
por los aeropuertos y líneas, incluso con
that we've seen
participación del
in
Estado,
airlines, that
aerolíneas
we've
con
seen
participación del
actually from
Estado,
the government having
las denuncias por
being an active participant in this.
robar o secuestrar las cajas de seguridad, las
How
cajas
they
fuertes
take
del narcotraficante Marcel,
the
cuando la
different
policía y
safe
la
from the
justicia lo
different safe
arrestan o
boxes
lo capturan.
of the
No
police,
se da ningún
take
responsable
out,
de esas desapariciones y han
and
hecho
there is no one held
obviamente volver a
responsible for
aparecer.
these sudden
Un avión que
disappearances.
siniestra con
A plane
cantidades de dineros que ha
that
llevado
was
a
found with
eliminar toda
vast
una
quantities of
serie
money,
de dinero y de peso boliviano, de billetes que son
with
anulados de la economía, le han
Bolivian
denominado los
money.
billetes basura. Y bueno, al mismo tiempo
And well,
levanta
at
la
the same time,
subvención,
they
una
lift
cosa que había prometido en campaña, pero que iba
one of
a
the things
ahorrar
that they promised
10
during their
millones de dólares
campaign.
por año. Sin embargo, la subvención es levantada, pero la gasolina es un desastre, es una gasolina basura
So
que daña
while they
todos los
lifted the
vehículos.
subsidies for
Por
gas,
otro
the
lado,
gasoline
eso también
quality
genera un
remained
descontento en el movimiento popular. Sin
trash.
solución, por supuesto, y sigue llegando la gasolina basura todo desde el mes
And
de
so we call this the
febrero,
trash
marzo, incluso
gasoline that
finales
keeps
del gobierno
arriving
de Luis Arce, ya había
under
denuncias en
the
donde
government
la
of Luis
compra y los
Arce.
contratos de gasolina,
There was
diésel,
already demands
estaban observados y habían sido denunciados por
that these
corrupción,
kinds
pero
of
este
tricks were
gobierno
being
ni
played,
lo resuelve a más de
but they were
6
remained
meses de
unresolved
su gobierno. Y
6
el
months
decreto
into his
5503, ajuste
administration.
neoliberal, que también es un ajuste que hace lo contrario de lo que
Again,
había
Decree
prometido en campaña electoral.
5503
El
was
movimiento
another
campesino
promise that was
popular
made
sale a
during
las
the
calles, la Central
elections
Obrera Boliviana, pero
on part of the
resulta que
right.
abroga el 5503 y cuando se
Sorry.
desmoviliza el pueblo boliviano
And once
pensando
the
que logró
once
una
the
victoria,
the
el gobierno
popular
vuelve a
movements of
sacar el
Bolivia
mismo decreto,
stopped
solo que
fighting, they
parcelado
began
en
to uplift again the
diferentes
Decree
decretos supremos que
5503,
iban a avanzar en el mismo propósito, en privatizar la
still
electricidad.
following. Sorry, I just wanted to remind you, Valle, that there's only a few
Claro
minutes
que sí, muchas
left
gracias.
for your
Entonces,
sections.
en el decreto supremo
Sorry, thank you. And
5503
so,
también se ve
Decree
anulado el pueblo boliviano
5503, we
porque
can
Rodrigo
also
Paz, a pesar de
see
abrogarlo, termina
that
volviendo a emitir otro decreto con un
in
número
in
diferente.
essence, the
Y
government
bueno,
continues to
finalmente,
show its deception under a
en
different
la democracia que tiene
name.
proscripción, el gobierno termina imponiendo a su
And
candidato a
so the
gobernador
government
en el
ends up,
departamento de La Paz, Luis Revilla,
um,
y toda la mayoría de las
excuse
provincias
me,
del movimiento
for
campesino
the
que tenían
majority of the different
otro
provinces that
candidato,
have the peasant
termina
majorities, we saw that
reclamando una
there
segunda vuelta
were
como
demands,
establecía
outcries
la normativa electoral. Finalmente,
to
el fin de
return
la
to
Central Obrera
elections.
boliviana
And
también es
so
algo que el gobierno
the
ha
Bolivian
rechazado,
Workers
no
Union
se ha sentado siquiera a negociar y bueno,
have
por
been demanding
esa
this, but there
razón
has
es
been
que
no sit down at a negotiation table with them.
el movimiento obrero
with the movement of the workers. And so May 1, they started the national strike, and that is where we are. If we go into the the final law, the land law of 1720, calling for a national march from the east. And okay, it has not been addressed by the government. And while essentially within the 6 months of the government, there should have been. I'm so sorry. Throughout this long process, there has been
ya no le puede permitir ir a una mesa de diálogo, porque se ha perdido la credibilidad del gobierno. La palabra de Rodrigo Paz ya no le
the
es
word of
suficiente a los
Rodrigo
movimientos
Paz
sociales, al movimiento
is not
popular,
corresponding
para
to the
encontrar una
demands of
salida.
the popular
Y
movements,
ante ello, por
which are
supuesto,
asking
se
for an
empeora
out
más, como dice
from
acá,
the
de
crisis.
que cuando el gobierno descalifica,
When the government
estigmatiza y persigue judicialmente a los dirigentes
stigmatizes
de la movilización.
at the
El
leaders of
gobierno arremete
movements
con la Policía Nacional, las Fuerzas
when they
Armadas,
are
pero
in bed
también sufre grandes derrotas
with the national
por
police,
el
the armed
movimiento popular.
forces,
En los meses de mayo y junio se han dado como
which we
5 o
saw
6
in May and June,
importantes hitos donde el movimiento popular hace
where the popular
retroceder
movement
al gobierno en su intención
made
de represión, por
pushbacks
supuesto, con un
against
alto
the
costo de
government,
vida.
made them fall back.
Y tenemos en Río Seco, Sencata,
We
Caracol,
have
Río Abajo,
particular
San Julián,
people
este
to think
último,
of:
y el Río Cora en
Rio
Cochacayo.
Seco,
Van a ser
Sencata,
momentos de mayor tensión en donde los
Caracayo, and
movilizados
others
hacen retroceder al gobierno nacional. La siguiente, por favor.
who help
Es
to
por eso que no es
make the
difícil
government fall
entender.
back.
Ahora el gobierno apuesta por el diálogo. Los
So now the
opinadores, todos,
government
y los medios de
opts for no
comunicación
dialogue,
dicen, pero ¿por qué no pueden
to
sentarse a
renunciate the
aceptar un
peace.
diálogo? ¿Por qué es la única salida es la renuncia? Porque se ha pasado
So why
por
is there
todo este proceso desde el golpe de
renunciation of
Estado de
peace now
2019. Siguiente lámina, por favor. Y
that is
está, por
unifying the different
supuesto,
sectors?
el movimiento popular agotado, cansado y además con una crisis económica que galopantemente viene afectando sus bolsillos. Por otro lado, la consigna que
On the
unifica
other
los
side,
sectores, porque cada sector
the
empezó una movilización
another
por separado, va a ser la
prohibition
renuncia
or
de Rodrigo
limit,
Paz. Se suscribe un pacto obrero campesino
there was a
en
pact that
donde
was
la
made, a
dirigencia
worker
se
peasant pact,
compromete a no traicionar ni
where town
negociar con
halls
el gobierno
resolved
por
to
separado.
not
Eso
negotiate
va a
with the
ser
government in
resuelto en el
solidarity with
cabildo
each
del
other,
1 de
as
mayo y otros posteriores que se dieron en la ciudad del Alto y la provincia de Masuyos. A
within
2
town halls,
semanas
but
del
also
inicio de
within
la movilización que
municipalities and
inicia
other
el 1 de
provinces.
mayo, el salto de
Since
los
May
puntos
1,
de bloqueo y cortes de carretera
the
es
different
contundente,
blocks,
de
blockades of
32
the
a
different streets
65, y teniendo en cuenta
increased
de
from
que
32 to
solamente se estaba
65 within 2 weeks.
circunscribiendo el conflicto en el departamento de La Paz y parte de Cochabamba. Pero a estas alturas, habiendo cumplido
At
ya,
this height
entrando al
of
mes de junio,
the
30 días de
struggle,
movilización,
30 days
los
of
departamentos que son
struggle,
parte de la
the
movilización son
departments
La
or
Paz,
areas
El
in the
Alto,
country,
Cochabamba, Oruro,
La Paz, El
Potosí,
Alto,
Chuquisaca, Santa
Cochabamba,
Cruz y Tarija.
Oruro,
Siguiente lámina, por
Potosí,
favor.
Churicuesta,
En esa medida,
Santa
eh,
Cruz.
¿qué es lo que se plantea la resistencia popular? A este
Okay, so
momento
what is the popular
tenemos casi
resistance stance?
106
At this current time,
puntos de bloqueo,
we have 106
generando, por
roadblocks,
supuesto, ya una crisis humanitaria
causing a humanitarian
sensible,
crisis
latente, sobre todo en el departamento de La Paz y
overall within
Cochabamba.
La Paz.
El gobierno apuesta recién
The
a convocar
government
al diálogo. Sin embargo, este no
belatedly
es aceptado
commits to
porque la
dialogue
persecución judicial sigue en proceso.
because of the
Al mismo tiempo de convocar el
at the
diálogo,
same time
levanta, elimina, abroga la ley
at the
134,
same time of committing to
lo que
dialogue, they are
regulaba las
also
listas
lifting the
audiencias
arrest
del
warrants of
movimiento.
leaders.
Por supuesto, para el gobierno esto
But
era
of
una
course,
traba,
the
porque
government
lo
for the
que a él le
government,
interesa es garantizar
their
la
interest is
efectividad de aplastar física y
to
militarmente
undermine
la movilización del
the
pueblo boliviano.
effectiveness of the
A estas
movement.
alturas el saldo de vidas es de 8 personas fallecidas, aún no
There have been
confirmadas,
other
incluso
8 dead.
otras 4.
There
Tenemos
are additional 4 that
varios
might be
heridos,
dead, but
no
not yet
quería poner una
confirmed.
cifra porque eso se ha ido
And
actualizando
sorry, there is no
hoy.
statistics on
Por
injured and
ejemplo,
missing
detenidos
because they are in
86
counting.
solamente la jornada del día de hoy. tenemos registrados.
Just today,
Y,
we
bueno,
registered.
desaparecidos también, de los que se han hecho secuestros en las
There
jornadas
have been missing.
pasadas,
There have
en
been
este
people that
periodo
have been
largo
taken,
anterior, sobre todo en la ciudad del Alto, y
especially
algunos sí han
in the
reportado
city
sus
La Alto,
detenciones y otros no.
and others who
Ese
have
es
been
un
put in
saldo muy
detention.
alto que está pagando el pueblo boliviano en
The
la
country is
movilización.
paying
Siguiente
for
lámina,
these
por favor.
attacks. So in the
Entonces,
next slide,
hay un plus en el que la
there's a
resistencia
plus
popular ha entrado en este último periodo.
that
El
the popular
gobierno ha
resistance have
convocado
entered
de manera
or
directa a
invoked
confrontar a la población. Ha
by
convocado a los
confronting
ciudadanos
directly
también a que vayan a desbloquear
the
con la
people.
protección de la Policía Nacional y
I'm
las
so
Fuerzas
sorry. It's
Armadas,
actually the government that is aiming to wear down the
desconociendo la
movement.
recomendación del Grupo
And under the guise of
Interdisciplinario del
humanitarian
GIEI,
crisis,
que
seeking to
designó la
crush the
CIDH
protests
después del golpe
militarily.
de 2019, que recomendaba
Since the coup
desarticular
of
estos grupos
2019,
irregulares fascistas de ultraderecha, que ahora el gobierno los está volviendo a rearticular para
the
ir a
government is
contrarrestar el
rearticulating
bloqueo nacional de
ultra-rightist
caminos. Por supuesto, ha sacado su propia ley
dialogue,
de estados de excepción
and so
está
their own
avanzando
law
con sus normativas, reglamentación para en los
to
próximos días
continue to
declarar ese
normalize
estado de excepción. Entonces,
state of
esas son
emergencies.
las alternativas que quedan a estas alturas de la movilización. Es, por un lado, si no,
These
si no
alternatives by the
cunde el
government,
desgaste de la movilización y puede mantenerse la movilización, por supuesto,
if
la
the
victoria del movimiento popular pasaría únicamente por la
so
renuncia
sorry.
de Rodrigo Paz. Sin embargo, por
Essentially, the
otro lado,
only
si el
way that
gobierno logra, apoyándose en el desgaste, en la presión social producto de
sorry,
la
the only
crisis
way that the
humanitaria que está
government right
generando el
now
corte de
manages to
rutas,
prevail
si logra desacreditando a los
is if they
movilizados
wear
con la
down the
prensa y
movement,
cerco mediático y una
using the
represión
press
brutal
for comedic
y logra
effects
en un baño de sangre eliminar y
within a
aplastar físicamente
bloodbath
al movimiento popular, por
to
supuesto, el
suppress
costo
the popular
político
movement,
también y social es
the
bastante
political
alto.
cost,
Se ha
the
llegado
political
al
social
punto
cost
de
would
que
be very
esas son
high.
las dos
And we've gotten to a
únicas
point now where
salidas
there are only
que en este
two
momento
exit
se ven
points
visibles.
that we
Y en esta
see.
última lámina siguiente, por favor, con esto termino. Muchas gracias por la paciencia. Por la traducción no he podido avanzar más rápido. Siguiente lámina, por favor.
So in the last slide,
Esto lo que nos queda, lo que nos da
what's left
son
is
algunos escenarios.
two
Primero,
scenarios.
que la movilización está confirmando
One,
de que los analistas y la prensa
that the
oficial,
analysts, the
los
press,
medios de comunicación,
the social
los
media,
representantes
the
políticos de
representatives
la derecha en nuestro
of
país
the political right
han celebrado cuando
celebrate
se dio el golpe de Estado de
when
2019
there
primero,
was a coup in
indicando de que se acabó
2019,
un ciclo, el ciclo del MAS.
indicating that there was
El
an
gobierno de
end of a
Luis Arce
cycle.
también celebra,
Luis
indicando de que
Arce
se
was
acabó el ciclo
celebrating that there was this
de
end of a
liderazgo de Evo
cycle
Morales.
of the
Y
leadership
bueno,
of Evo
Rodrigo Paz
Morales,
con la victoria
and Rodrigo
aparente
Paz,
sobre la
with this
izquierda
victory,
cuando había
then
proscripción
stands
también
above the right
celebra
and
que acabó el
celebrates
ciclo
that yes,
del
this cycle
movimiento
has
al
ended.
socialismo anterior. Pero lo que está mostrando la
But what we're
movilización es de que
seeing now
no
in
hay
the
un
mobilizations is that there
fin de
is
ciclo,
no
porque el
one
ciclo
end of a
político no
cycle.
es solamente
The political cycle
de un presidente o
is not just from
expresidente
one
o una
president
persona,
or one
tampoco tiene
person,
que ver y no es el ciclo
and it's
político
not
de un
only
partido o de un
a,
instrumento
a
político en
cycle of a
específico, sino
particular
que el
political
ciclo
party,
popular es
but
más
rather
grande.
that the
Es el
cycle is
ciclo
actually
popular
bigger. It's
campesino, el
popular,
que
it's
después del
of
ciclo
the
neoliberal
peasants.
todavía está vigente
The
y
cycle
es la
of
causa
neoliberalism
fundamental
is
por la
actually
que
the
no
main
está
cause, the
pudiendo
fundamental cause
implementarse
for why we
varias
can't
cosas que
implement
son propias de un
various
cambio de ciclo o una nueva
things
construcción de hegemonía.
to
Por ejemplo, no
officiate the
pueden
start of a new
reformar la
cycle.
constitución
You
política del
cannot
Estado ahora,
reform
no
the political
pueden
state right now.
aplicar un ajuste neoliberal, aunque
You cannot
piensen de que ya el
reform
movimiento popular está
neoliberalism.
aceptando eso y que vivimos un nuevo ciclo. Esta movilización, una de las
This
victorias que
mobilization,
tiene,
one
uno
of
de
the
los
best
mensajes
victories,
profundos en
has
nuestro país,
been the
es
message,
que ese ciclo abierto
the
después del
profound message
neoliberalismo de los años
that the
90,
cycle after the
el
neoliberal
ciclo
cycle
popular
of the 90s,
campesino
that the
que le
peasant
denomino,
cycle
no ha terminado porque no está
has not
dispuesto a
finished
abrir otro
because
ciclo neoliberal o de sometimiento a los
it is
intereses
not
de los
willing to
sectores
allow a
neoliberales.
neoliberal
El
cycle
movimiento
to
campesino
take
sigue
root.
siendo
So the peasant movement continues to be the most foundational aspect of these cycles. I think this is one of the major things to understand and consider about this situation. A second conclusion that is important is that there will not exist an out for the social conflict, one that is permanent, not short term. If we do not address the destabilization to return justice and lift up the unconstitutional prohibitions that push out the peasant and worker movements in Bolivia, that is one of the major importance. If we don't return to the Constitution, we will have governments where the majority choose only those who do not represent them. It will leave us with governments that take the presidential seat but do not take governance over the country. If there is no exit to the crisis, the economic crisis by the right,
y que descargue el peso de la crisis entre los sectores que se han privilegiado y han acumulado grandes fortunas con los recursos naturales de este país. Si se insiste en aplicar el modelo
there is an
económico
insistence
neoliberal que
to continue with an economic program
en caso de quedarse y aplastar físicamente al pueblo boliviano,
to stomp down on the Bolivian country,
liberalización de la economía, levantar la subvención y liberarlo al precio de la divisa internacional, en el caso de la gasolina y hydrocarburos. Pero si sigue
if there's not a lifting of the different restrictions on gasoline under Rodrigo Paz, then the conflict will continue. Again, if we only have to choose between these various different electoral candidates of the right, the people of Bolivia will continue to turn out into the streets and fight to prevent the sellout of the country. I believe these are one of the only ways in which we will see a return. And so the weaknesses of the movement, what are they? Unfortunately, the Bolivian workers' movement, there has been persecution from the government, which has managed to weaken it, preventing it from being a central leadership force. But the bases, the sectors, they are regrouping, independent independent of these threats of bloodbaths, continuing intensification of attacks on the movement. The popular movements are already sealed in. We are already in revolt, not just of the Rodrigo Paz government. We are saying no to the politics of neoliberalism, no to these conditions of the IMF, no, a final no to the politics that represent Rodrigo Paz. And that is an indication of an important advancement to the struggles of all these years. The popular movements are once again starting to stand on their feet in an anti-imperialist fashion for national sovereignty. And that is a victory in this time of struggle. It is the prelude to the future fights, because there is physically, even though leaders are not here, they are incarcerated, we are already forging a program
que va
an
a
alignment
defender el pueblo boliviano.
that will defend
Salir a
the
la crisis
Bolivian
defendiendo la
country,
economía
to
popular
defend
y
the,
afectando a los
defeat the
ricos,
crisis,
afectando a los grandes
affecting the
intereses del
rich,
empresariado nacional y las
affecting the interests of the
corporaciones
private
y volver
enterprises,
al hilo
and return
constitucional
to
democrático
the
para salir de la
line
crisis.
of
Con
constitution.
con esas conclusiones, compañeros, yo termino
And
mi
that's,
participación. Muchas
my
gracias por
comrades,
su paciencia y
what I
disculpas
would
por la demora.
end with. Thank you so much for
Muchas
listening.
gracias, Bayo, de verdad, por esta exposición tan exhaustiva sobre la situación en nuestro país. Entendemos que se requiere
Thank you very
un
much,
buen tiempo para
Bayo,
explicar todo lo que está sucediendo. Para honrar el
for
tiempo que tenemos de retraso,
we're going to continue so we could step ahead. And so the first person that is going to comment, who is part of the US-led war resist movement, she's also a local anti-imperialist organization based in Seattle, United States. Carly, please go ahead.
Hola a todos y todas, muy buenas tardes, buenas noches en Bolivia, buenos días en Filipinas. Es un honor estar con ustedes. Muchas gracias por la invitación.
Those of you here in Venezuela, thank you for inviting me. Resist US-led war movement to be.
Es global contra el
This is a global.
por una paz justa.
It's a led war movement. We are humbled and honored to be here in Bolivia
Luchas contra el imperialismo yanqui.
and to be fighting against imperialism
Guerra, agresión y atacar a su fondo. Que es el
and
imperialismo.
to fight against imperialism.
Es un tema muy importante, muy
This is what we're talking about right here. It's very urgent, it's very important, and we're very, very happy to be here with you, to be alongside you in Bolivia, and to mobilize our networks against the US intervention, backing up the fascist attacks by the Paz regime.
Y quiero comentar
I want to comment on the one hand that the reforms that the people are rising up against reflect the broader trends across Latin America.
al fascismo y militarización
As the US imperialist
del continente,
that we can see it in all the continent that is taking hold.
imperializa
As the US imperialist decline accelerates,
Trump
the fascist Trump regime is propping up fascist leaders across Latin America, crystallized in the so-called Shield of the Americas,
en Florida,
it was deployed this year in Florida. On one side, Trump's national security strategy emphasizes control over Latin America.
occidental.
And
Postura militar
this military posture is essentially a reaction to the deepening crisis of imperialism, which is even deeper and deeper, that has plagued the United States since the 1970s and grown far more acute over the last 2 decades.
bien el capital
While US monopoly capital is still the main enemy of the peoples of the world, its global standing as the main imperialist is declining at an accelerating rate.
más acelerado. La participación
The US share of global economic output has plunged from around 40% in 1960 to roughly half that figure today.
de la mitad de esa cifra en la actualidad, el día de hoy. Mientras intenta
As it desperately tries to maintain its position as the world's top hegemon, the United States has turned Latin America into a heated front of struggle with its primary strategic rival, China, which has risen to the second largest trade partner in the region,
y eso representa
posing a direct threat to the US colonial control of its backyard.
Estados Unidos en América Latina. Pero como sabemos y como el pueblo
As we see, as the Bolivian people knows, that Latin America is not for the United States, it's for their own people. I also want to say something else, another point of view. At a recent
counter cartel conference.
at a counter cartel conference this year, the White House Security Advisor Stephen Miller said that the United States would not cede an inch of territory in this hemisphere, describing a doctrine that leans on lethal force. They want to use their armed forces in order to enact their control. But the United States can only hold onto its power through enlisting fascist Latin American, Caribbean leaders loyal to United States fascists in the war. That's the only way that they can ensure the control through the over the trade routes and resources and work and labor of the peoples using force. That's the only way that they can do it. As they can do it with through the shield, the Americans, they have consolidated the fascist element of the ruling class and the bureaucratic capitalist inside Latin America and in many countries into a continent-wide expanded military force, and have rapidly signed. And this is something that all the Latin American peoples are fighting against. And we also see the presence of the DEA across Latin American frames. This military incursion as a civil drug enforcement policy. But we know that over the decades, the U.S. war on drugs has been bloody and tightly connected to counterinsurgency, with ordinary civilians suffering the brunt of state-led human rights violations. And that this has been enacted by the United States. On the other side, the United States has waged all of our attacks against progressive governments and leaders, from the stranglehold on Cuba and the threat of direct military actions to the kidnapping of President Maduro and first combatant Celia Flores by the United States on January 3rd, 2026. The United States is no longer paying lip service to the international rules-based order. By combining the war on drugs with the United States war on terror, the United States has been waging a continent-wide counterinsurgency campaign under the framework of narco-terrorism. That's just something that they made up with. It's something that they made up in order for them to enact and to terrorize people in Latin America. However, try as it might to eliminate any political resistance. Sorry. What I think it's very important in order for us to say we are very inspired by the Bolivian peoples, by the indigenous peoples, by the people, the rural peoples that are rejecting the racism and the extraction of the lands. And that our movements can learn from the struggle in Bolivia and the power and the strength of unity in their fight. All of us can learn from that. And to call our comrades all over the world that people come out to the streets in support, and for us to continue strengthening our solidarity with the Bolivian peoples, in order for us to bring it about in a very concrete way against the weapon factories, against the repressive regimes that are being backed by the United States, by the government of Trump. I'm sorry that it took such a long time, but we are with you. Down the Trump, and for international solidarity to continue living. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut,
toda la organización por el trabajo.
but and I cannot stop thanking you and all of the organization for all the work that you have been doing, and in this contingency, in order for us to continue having solidarity with Bolivia.
Yonda, ella es de Colombia.
The next person that we're going to see is Leonor Yonda from Colombia. Maria Leonor Yonda, a peasant leader and human rights defender for the past 15 years. She's currently vice president of the National Agrarian Coordination Committee and is also a delegate to the political coordination body of Club Via Campesina in Colombia. Thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours. Hello to all the peoples, all the peoples here, and I send you a big hug of resistance and solidarity and fraternity. For us, this is not far away from the Latin American situation that Latin America is going through. And we have been going through this against fascism since colonialism started. Genocide, especially the killing of and the genocide of the social movement. And we have been waging a war against it. And so from colonial times, Colombia has been waging a war for the domain of the territory. And those of us that have utilized the country itself, we have also gone through a crisis that has taken, and there has been a structural crisis that we have been going through, and this has evolved in a violence that we have seen the exterminium of a lot of unions, of labor unions. And the working peoples have always mobilized themselves in order to ask and to demand for their rights, to have rights to the land. And which has been characterized by the constant mobilization. In Colombia, we have seen the doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine being imposed on us, and which has been imposed on Latin America as well. And so we know about the imperialist model. And so we have seen a lot of periods of different governments from the right. And recently Paloma Valencia, who she is from the far right. And part of what she wanted to do was to go against the indigenous peoples and the indigenous communities, which want to once again take away the land from us, to rob us of the land. And in order for them to serve the big corporations and the elite, and we come from a government, not the one before, but the one before that, from the right. However, Colombia is entered a very strong crisis after the 90s with Gaviria, entered a neoliberal crisis. And so in 2000s, Uribe gets there. And so all the improvements that have been done, especially health-wise, and then so the law 100 that privatized education, and it favored all the national security and the IPS, which is this these institutions that serve the peoples by health-wise, and this damages And so we see that it's very important for us to continue working towards for us to be able to get our. And we have seen how how in the Uribe government, he said that with a very strong hand and the hand on the chest. And those of you that would mobilize in order to ask for the rights and demand the rights, people started getting killed. And so they said that everybody that would go out into the streets demanding the rights, they would get killed. And they will be stigmatized and they will be politically persecuted. There has been 6,400 false positives, which are those people that supposedly were guerrillas, but they were actually not, that got killed. There were civilians that were killed unfairly. And this was exported into Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. And so big people, in order for them to defend other lands that were exported, these paramilitaries were exported into these other countries in order to continue their paramilitarism. And so we have a very difficult period. So you have a minute and a half less. And so after that, all of this time of depression, Duque gets here. And so what the movement does in the 2020, 2019, people are done. There was a 42% of the peoples are impoverished. And so from the month of April till June, they tried to do away with everything that Duque was doing. And so thanks to this big revolt of the people that lasted 4 months, and there were about 400 people that have disappeared, and there is about 100 people that got killed. And this happened on the Colombian upheaval. And meanwhile this was happening, people that came out of the streets, and so they went into the voting stages in order for them to get a new president. So right now, with the president that we have right now, we have a couple of more rights, but now this imperialism fascist government backed by the United States, and that they're trying to do away with drug trafficking, which is a huge lie. They want to install these fascist governments, the same thing that happened with Bukele in El Salvador and Milei in Argentina. And so they're trying to do the same thing here in Colombia. And so we are struggling right now in order to continue with a government like Iván Cepeda, following what the government of Petro. We value and we highlight the struggle of the Bolivian peoples, and we stand with you in solidarity. Thank you very much, Maria, and we tell you from Bolivia, and we stand in solidarity with you, and we hope that it doesn't happen. Thank you, Maria. Our final speaker is Raymond Palatino. He's a Filipino activist, writer, and the current president of Bagong Aligasang Makabayan, a multi-sectoral organization in the Philippines that fights for national liberation against imperialism, feudalism, bureaucratic capitalism. He previously served as a congressman representing the youth group Kabataan Party List in the Philippine House of Representatives from 2007 to 2013. a former student leader at the University of Philippines, Diliman. He has been actively involved in youth labor and democratic movement and continues to write on social and political issues in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Please go ahead, Raymond.
Go ahead,
Thank you, Alejandro, for the introduction. Uh, I am from Bayan, or New Patriotic
Eh,
Alliance.
just give me 1 second, please. Para quienes ingresaron tarde al evento, la parte de
So
abajo
sorry, give me one
barra
second.
donde
For those
dice
who are just
globos de
joining
canje,
the
ahí hay la
webinar,
opción de
please
interpretación para
and
español.
see below the globe
Los
for
que
the
ingresaron tarde.
interpretation of language selection.
Sorry, go ahead.
So sorry.
You can continue.
Thank you. So, as mentioned earlier, I am from Bayan, or New Patriotic Alliance. It is a multi-sectoral alliance of people's organizations based in the Philippines, carrying out the people's national democratic struggle. And we are also pursuing anti-imperialist campaign in the Philippines. Thank you for this invitation to be part of this webinar. It became a crash course for me on the situation in Bolivia, the Bolivian crisis, the role of the US in the crisis, and most importantly, updates on the people's resistance in Bolivia. Thank you to our speakers for providing us with the historical roots of the crisis. They mentioned the coup, the breaching of the constitutional order, uh, the rise of the center-right parties, the undermining of the people's movements. They also mentioned the economic roots of the crisis, how people are reacting to the removal of subsidies, the imposition of neoliberal measures, the austerity measures, the impact of the oil crisis. They also mentioned that the link between the flawed electoral system, the flawed electoral process, and the ongoing crisis. What uh, what made a standout for me, but not really surprising, is the role of the U.S. in instigating the crisis in Bolivia. Ah, the speakers mentioned about how U.S. officials colluded with some elitist politicians in Bolivia in instigating the crisis. This is not surprising given that the U.S. has this notorious history of intervening in the affairs of several countries, most especially in Latin America. This is also similar to the experience of the Philippines, a former colony of the US. And despite the granting of independence in 1946, we remained a neo-colony of the US. For successive decades up to the present, the US retained its strong political influence and military influence in the Philippines. In the past 3 decades, the US was able to uh, amplify and expand its military presence in the Philippines despite the ouster of US bases in 1991. This was made possible because of the treasonous policies of our puppet governments. Under the current government of Marcos Jr., who became president in 2022, he allowed the installation of additional U.S. military bases in the Philippines. He expanded the year-round military exercises. He allowed the storage and installation of missile systems from the U.S. to the Philippines. And he did this because he needed the political and military support of the U.S. Meanwhile, on the part of the U.S., it wanted the Philippines to become uh, integrated into its military network as part of its first island chain strategy to contain China, which is now its rival in the Asia Pacific. So what is happening in Bolivia in terms of U.S. Political intervention? This is also similar to what is happening in many parts of the world. So it is a reminder that the biggest threat to peace and development, the biggest threat to our democracy is no other than U.S. imperialism. And another major lesson for me from the webinar is the description of Rodrigo Paz. For me, he is a classic example of a bureaucrat capitalist. Similar in the Philippines. A bureaucrat capitalist like him needs a patron like the US. And he is using his position in government to promote US policies, to promote the interest of US imperialism, big capitalists in the US, and also local compradors. His role is to ensure that government programs, government policies are used to boost the super profits of capitalists and to undermine peasant movements, workers' movements, and the people's resistance. And so, while listening in the webinar, I find familiarity in the situation of Bolivia in terms of how the government is weaponizing laws to crack down workers' movements, how terror laws are being used to demonize resistance, to undermine the people's protests. But at the same time, the webinar also was inspiring because it reminded me of the people's resistance in Bolivia, the roadblocks, the workers' movements defying the crackdown, the peasant movements asserting that we are still in the peasant cycle, that the political cycle is not about neoliberalism alone, but it is about the peasants asserting control, asserting political authority. And I think the speakers ended on a positive note about the importance of solidarity and about ending the cycle of neoliberalism and ushering in the cycle of greater, stronger people's resistance. And for me, I think the main takeaway from this webinar is the importance of building a strong anti-imperialist front from the Latin Americas to the Southeast Asia, from the Americas to the Asia Pacific. And our commitment from the Philippines as we celebrate our so-called Independence Day tomorrow, our contribution, our biggest contribution to the Bolivian resistance is our pledge to defeat U.S. imperialism in our backyard. So we will step up our campaign to call for the dismantling of U.S. bases in the Philippines, the removal of U.S. troops, the removal of Typhoon and other missile systems, and the importance of linking arms with other anti-imperialist formations in Bolivia and elsewhere to remind people that it is U.S. imperialism which is responsible not just for the horrific crimes in West Asia, in Palestine, but also for imposing its neoliberal policies to prevent real development, to prevent genuine peace and democracy in our countries, and the path forward and the future lays in the United People's resistance against U.S. imperialism. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Muchas
much.
gracias por tus aportes.
Thank you
Vamos
so
entonces
much
ahora sin
for
diferencia a
your
página número
contributions. We are 12, more than 12 hours
miles en kilómetros,
difference
pero similaridades
from
longitudinales
Philippines
en
and many
diferentes
miles between us, but we
países.
appreciate
Bueno,
the
hemos dejado
comments
la opción de si
about
quisieran
how US imperialism
participar
has impacted
en
both of
la
our
sección
countries.
de preguntas y
And so now we
respuestas.
have to move on to the
Voy
questions and answers
de
portion of
momento
our
esperar unos
program.
segundos para ver si alguien quiere
We
plantear
have a
alguna pregunta.
couple minutes if
Encantados de
maybe
recibirlos,
one person wants
adicionales
to share
en agradecimiento a las
any
participaciones
comments
y en
about
reconocimiento
the
a los
speakers,
que han reforzado varios
comments that
puntos
were made,
que nos viene muy bien para entender lo que está sucediendo. Y si no tenemos
or the
ahora mismo
questions.
preguntas, vamos
And
a
if there
pasar
aren't
a la
any
última
questions,
parte de
we
este
can move
evento,
on to the last part of the program.
invitando a
to invite Gabriela Montaño to bring the synthesis, final comments. We are very thankful for Gabriela. She is a former senator, Bolivia, 2002, 2013, in the House of Representatives in 2006-18, and she was also part of the Bolivian government when the coup happened. So if not, we can give her the space to make the synthesis. Thank you very much, Alejandro. My task is not simple because there was a lot that was stated, and I think they are all important, but I will try. And first off, there was the exposition of the comrade from Bolivia that allows us to situate. So Valle Martinez, he tries to situate, right, the different structural causes of what's happening today in Bolivia. He situates these different structural causes previously with the different breaks in the constitutional order that are clearly marked in our past, but also in the betrayal of the government because it was a rightist government. And the different preventative measures to stop Evo Morales from participation in the elections. But then there's also the economic crisis, the neoliberal crisis. There we see the measures by which the Áñez government pushed forward in 2016, 2019. He spoke about 40 different measures that were basically carrying Bolivia to the current crisis we see today in the economy that is taking over the whole country. Finally, the different adjustments that were made by Paz, the economic adjustments, come from this recent history because the people, why they asked for his resignation? Because he pretended, even though he received the support from different popular sectors, including the peasants, he decided to govern with and for the right, with the oligarchy of Bolivia. The first instance of that is pretending to, by installing the neoliberal policies throughout the country, but then also stopped by a popular movement that rose up in December 2025. He wants to continue this and continue to purge the different leader groups, the Bolivia's workers union, the peasant sectors. And so we see these intents to implement these neoliberalism in Bolivia. Despite this was in contrary to all of the different promises that he made during his campaign, they were carrying, we should say, the Bolivian country. But because, of course, they took this up against the different instances of corruption, narco trafficking, the different lifting of the subsidies of gasoline, for example. What does Bayo share about the advances of the popular peasants movement? A pact, a worker peasant pact that maintains solid an incremental blocks, the increasing of the blocks of the streets. in what is current now, of hard resistance of the peasants against the violence of the government, uh, trying to block like San Julián and Santa Cruz in the different highways of Cochabamba. And what we've seen is that the popular movements are not just resisting, but they're also growing. They're growing in sectors and numbers mobilized. It's important, I think, to say at this height, as Bayo said, Rodrigo Paz has generated mobilization, a new law to impose a state of exception in Bolivia. And this would imply an intense violence by the government against all of the popular and peasant sectors that would cause a bloodbath. And so when Bayo talks about the future scenarios and the different conclusions, I think it's important that we highlight that he said that there was not an end of the popular indigenous peasants sector, but rather that the long-term ending was despite that the victors would seal one of the biggest weaknesses that we see, in which result in what Vaya was saying about if they close the doors to the option of the electoral processes of the country would continue but fighting for their rights. And that fight for rights will imply right governments that don't have the ability to govern in the long term. I would add there, if folks allow me to say that another great victory that has happened, aside from the worker peasant pact, has been the revival of that worker peasant alliance, but also the unification of the indigenous communities as well, who are defending territories after the crisis of Luis Arce and Evo Morales. There were a lot of ruptures within those different relationships. And so it's important that there is this reunification in the alliance of the indigenous, the worker, and peasants. I think it's very important what Bayo also said, that these mobilizations have returned, brought back to life this program of resistance, popular resistance, anti-imperialist, and anti-Yankee. The people are not just fighting for their own particular sectoral interests, or that they don't get their lands taken from them, but that there is a general program that is anti-neoliberal, anti-imperialist, that defends the natural resources of the Bolivia, that does not permit the plurinational state regress. And so the summary of the different positions that were stated, I'm so sorry I hadn't made a summary of them yet. It's okay, Gabriela. I think I know folks the different additional comments that were mentioned were complementary to the keynote speaker and what has occurred with the different similarities happening in Colombia, Philippines. And so if you've concluded, Gabriela, I think then we can conclude this space unless there is an additional comment. No, just wanted to alert because we have a lot of comrades here outside of Bolivia attending tonight's call to alert it's possible, like Vayo said, that there be this exceptional state of affairs in Bolivia, that it will provoke much violence against the different mobilized sectors, but they will not step back until they reach the resignation of the government, of the president. And there could be in the next couple of days an attempt of a illegal detention of Evo Morales to United States, as we've seen in the different media. And that I think those alerts should help us in the logic of the different international solidarities that our comrades share are here, and those who are not, that know we are in the same commitments. So as we wait the next couple of days. So thank you, Gabriela. Thank you. That is an important alert. And so if I can just say a little bit about what has been happened in the current state, and it's really just that the actual president has already activated the civil society alongside the oligarchies to ally with the armed forces, the police, to fight against the popular camps. It's an irresponsible call to make, promoting this kind of call. Well, I just want to say I appreciate the presence of everyone. This has been organized by the ILPS, the International League of People Struggle, in English and Spanish. We will create materials for both languages, and we've seen the different questions actually in some of the chats, but due to time, we will not be able to address them at this point. But please, of course, if folks want to email us or contact us outside the call, that is okay. I just want to say thank you to Bayardo, Gabriela, the different speakers, Maria Mong, Carly, and others. And we really appreciate the solidarity and the attention that is being given to Bolivia about what is happening on the ground. So thank you, hugs, and we are in the struggle with you.